What I want to do now is demonstrate how we put the plywood subfloor on our house. Now, in this view right here, you can see that I've highlighted where the subfloor goes, and this is the garage, and you'll notice that there's no subfloor in the garage. And the reason is that the cars that go into your garage sit on a concrete slab, which is on the grade. Now, this photograph shows a good illustration of the bottom of the door is essentially the level of the first floor. But look where the grade is. It's way down here. And so look where the bottom of the garage door is. Well, it's down at the grade because your car drives up the driveway, the door opens up, and it's a smooth connection between the driveway and the garage slab. And you can see that that is lower than that. So there's two different elevations, and I've provided some graphic views of that, of the fact that the garage slab is lower than the floor. And you can see in each of these diagrams, this floor is way up here and the garage slab is here. And in every instance, it can be different. In our case, we made the distance between the garage slab or the grade and the finished floor, we made it 3 feet, but it can change depending on the topography around each individual house. And in this case, it's much lower. So there are many steps going from the garage slab to the first floor in this case. So if we zoom in and look real close at this diagram, this is our basement wall that we made, and it is the variable. This is the wall we put on top of the basement wall between the house and the garage. And we made that 8 inches, I believe. Maybe we made it a little bit more than that, but you can see it's not anywhere near this amount of distance. And then we have the finished floor up here, which is some sort of, in this case right here, some sort of tile. And what I want to put in now is this plywood subfloor. And what happens is, in the construction process, the excavator comes out and digs a hole first, where the basement's going to go. Then the basement people come in and they form footings, which we haven't put in on our project yet. And then they pour concrete into those forms, and that creates the footing. Then they put a formwork up for this basement wall, and they pour concrete into that. And then after that basement wall is cured and they take the formwork away, the carpenters come in and they put a little sill plate right here on top of the basement wall, all the way around the perimeter. And I think we've left room for that. We might have to make a little change to our wall. But then the carpenters come in and they put the floor joists in, depending on what size the floor joist is. They 2x10s or 2x8s or 2x12s. And after they put all the floor joists in, then they put the plywood subfloor on top of that. After they put the subfloor on, then they start to build the walls on top of the plywood subfloor. And today what I want to do is show that plywood subfloor and draw it in properly. So we can see in the different ways that I've illustrated the same detail that there's a footing, our basement wall. On top of that, we put, this would be called the brick ledge, but in the wall between the house and the garage, we don't put any brick. So there's still that little brick ledge that we have there. Remember in this diagram, we have a little brick ledge here, but we don't put any brick on it because it's between the house and the garage. And brick is an expensive material. It's used to keep the elements out of the house, but the garage has a roof over it, which will keep the elements out of the house. So this is what we're trying to do. And I just want to point out that when you put your subfloor in, don't put it into the garage area because that has a slab, not a plywood subfloor. So it's real easy to put that plywood subfloor in, and I'll show you how to do that now. So we'll zoom in real close and take a look at my floor plan. And what I want to do is go up to the architecture tab, and then I want to go over to the floor, and I want to put in plywood subfloor or 3/4 inch plywood. All right. If you haven't made a 3/4 inch plywood, now's the time to do it, but I think it comes standard in your library. If If you need help with that individually or in the class, I'll show you how to do that. But I'm going to say I want it to be 3/4 plywood. So now it's going to be 3/4 plywood. The height off of the first floor, that's the level. I want it to be right at the first floor. So I think I'm going to set it at 0. Well, I am going to set it at 0, and I think that's the correct elevation to put it at. But once I put it in, we can look at the section and see if it's in the right location or not. So now Revit wants me to identify a boundary. And we're going to draw that boundary. It starts out as a magenta line. A boundary means that it has to be a closed entity. In other words, you can't have a square with only 3 sides on it. It has to have all 4 sides. And an odd shape, the start line has to end up touching the end line. And I think that'll make a little bit more sense to you in a minute. But what I want to do now is I'm going to use Revit to draw the perimeter of the plywood subfloor. And I'll use this icon right here, which is pick lines. And then I'm going to zoom in real close. I have in plan view, this is the gypsum board. This is the softwood lumber. Then we have the plywood sheathing, the rigid insulation, the airspace, and then the brick on the outside. And that's that stacked wall that we made. So now I want to zoom in there, and I don't want to select this dash line. I want to select the line that represents the inside face of the plywood. So I'll hit the tab key while I'm hovering my mouse over the object that I want. Because Revit can be a little confused and it doesn't really know what line I want to pick. And it shows me all of the options. As we hit the tab key, it'll go through all the other ones. And Revit's basically saying to us, do you want to select this? No. Do you want to select this? No. Do you want to select this? No. Do you want to select this? Yes. And so then I simply click on it. When I click on it, I'm going to click this little lock key. And what that lock key does means that if I move this wall, and you saw when I was doing the second floor that some of my first floor walls moved, if I happen to move this wall now, what will happen is that the boundary of the plywood subfloor will also move with it. So that allows us not to have to go back in and move. If we move the wall and the plywood edge stays here, then we move the wall out to here, then we have to move the plywood edge out to here. So I'm simply going to go around all of the exterior walls, tab, select, lock, and then come up to here, tab, select, lock, and then come over to here, tab, select, lock. And I'm going all the way around the perimeter of the house and selecting the right location. I'm simply drawing the perimeter of the plywood and locking it. And I'm going all the way around, tab, select, lock. And so this is going to be drawing the perimeter of the plywood subfloor. We'll put our finished floor on top of the subfloor, but that's what the carpenters start walking on right away after they put that floor in to build the rest of the first floor walls. So we're going to walk around, pan around the project, and make sure we lock it. You don't have to lock it, but that could provide additional work for you later on. If you're getting paid by the hour, that might be how you want to do it. It is the most difficult, a time-consuming way to do it. But generally, our time is valuable, and we want to make sure that we use the power of Revit as much as possible. And so I don't think I've done this one yet, so I'll come back in here, tab. And so I think now I can see that this line and this line aren't connected, so I'll fillet that or trim, extend. And now I think it's possible that I have an exactly closed entity here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up and say, okay. And if I don't have a closed entity, Revit will tell me that I haven't connected all of these corners, and then it will show me where I haven't. So let's hit the green check mark. And sure enough, Revit saying that lines cannot intersect with each other. So I'm going to continue, and look what's showing me where, by changing the color, it's actually showing me where my problem is. So I can zoom in there, and sure enough, what happens here, those two lines intersect, and they can't, they have to absolutely close within each other. Okay, so I think now, again, I think I'm in pretty good shape. I'll hit the green check mark, and sure enough, it says lines must be in closed loops. Well, look what it's doing. It's showing me where it's not. So I will continue and simply go down there and clean up that line. Now that's a closed loop. And Revit said down here, it's not closed either. Okay, so I think maybe I'm in good shape. I'll say okay. And look at that. It put my plywood subfloor in. If I change the color, you can see that it's plywood now. And that's where I want the plywood to be perimeter-wise. Now let's take a look at the section. We'll go to that view and we'll zoom in. And sure enough, it's exactly where I want it to be. We've set the bottom of the wall to the first floor, and the plywood subfloor goes from the first floor down to the top of the floor joist. And look at that. When I highlight it, you can see it goes right up to that line that represents the plywood sheathing. And so we're in pretty good shape here. If I take a look at that in 3D, you can see now that the floor is in on my first floor. And we would do the same thing on the second floor, but I'll stop the tutorial now to allow you to try putting that in on your first floor. But before I do that, let's go back to the first floor and watch what happens if I move this wall. Let's say I want to move this wall for whatever reason. See what happened with the subfloor? It expanded out to that because I'd locked it into that wall. So no matter what I do with these walls now, move them left or right, in or out, up or down, the subfloor will go right up to it. Now, had we not locked these together, then this plywood subfloor would have stayed where I had drawn it originally, and I'd have to go back in and edit. Then I would have to edit the boundary. And you can see my magenta line, and now I'd have to move that magenta line where it's supposed to be. So it's just additional work. So I'm going to say okay because it's fine. My subfloor looks really good. Now I've already put some tile in the bathroom, and that's why that looks a little bit different. But that's a different tutorial. So that'll be part of our responsibility now. After we're comfortable with our first floor wall location, because we worked on our second floor wall location, we can start to put the subfloor in now, which will be not that difficult of a thing to do, but we want to make sure that our second floor is kind of laid out essentially where we want it to be. I've moved things around on the second floor because it's a stacked wall that moved on the first floor too. So I think we're in pretty good shape here. So I'm going to stop the tutorial now and let you give this a try.